Thanks so much, Rob. And I think I'll share the screen and pop up my slides. And I do just want to, before we kick off, I suppose not remind everyone, but I think one of the key attributes of people who work in academia but who are also practitioners is we have the ability to take what we see in that science and try to practically apply it to the clients that we work with. And I think that can be a real advantage to how you interpret and understand that literature, because you do get studies that might show a particular mechanism or that something works a certain way, but if it's not working in a way that people can actually apply it, or if it's not reasonable for someone to apply it, then what good is that to the people out there kind of who are interested in the space and who are wanting the information. So I think being a practitioner who applies science, yet also using what I see from clients as part of my evidence base, I think that is something which a lot of practitioners do. So yeah, I definitely kind of look at things with a critical view on both sides of that, as a practitioner, but also as a person who is involved in understands research. And I'll also say, you could get someone with the same qualifications and with the same level of experience who work with similar people, and they may tell you like something different. And so this is, tonight I'm going to go through the questions and answer them how I would kind of operate with my clients, but that doesn't mean that this is the only way. So, and I mean, that's the same with the coaches and stuff, I'm sure, and other people on the call who work in similar kind of fields. Like, you have people kind of put their own lens to it based on their experience and their clientele and as they understand it. So this isn't gospel, and if what I say doesn't actually, you try it and it doesn't work for you, it doesn't mean it's not applicable to someone else, and it doesn't mean that you're not doing it properly. It's just, that's, humans are imperfect, and the science is imperfect. And it really does come back to the individual and how they I suppose how they take the advice and how they kind of not cope, but how they apply it in their own individual response. Anyway, it's a bit of waffle too. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully, I've just got just set up a new computer, so just kind of, for whatever reason, it's got a big, it's not helpful, a big exclamation mark and kind of a date. Oh wait, here we go. I think this is all right. Yeah. Zoom will not be able to record the contents of your screen until it is quit. I'll go later. Hopefully that's all right. Okay. And sorry, listening to my monologue. There we go. Cool. Okay. Okay. And I'll just go like that. You guys can see that?
Yep, we're all good, Mikki.
Brilliant, thank you. And what I'll do is I'll pop oh cool, thanks guys. I'll pop the chat box over to the right, and I'll just keep an eye on it as we go through. And so if any questions come up on the questions that I've got in front of me, feel free just to pop them in the chat box, and I will probably just turn around, kind of look to the right and refer to them. And I've said to Rob that we've got a certain period of time tonight, and if I don't get through them all, I'm really happy to come back on for a part 2 and any follow-up questions and things like that. Yeah, so as Rob's already kind of introduced me, I probably don't need to go into any more detail. So I might just kick off. Apologies, these slides are really boring, but I thought they were quite useful to cue me and to cue my thought process around the questions. So that's a poll. I don't know if you guys have a poll available right now, because are you all in Melbourne, or Is this from around?
We've got people have registered from all over Australia. I think the majority of us will be in Victoria.
Cool.
In which case we dream of seeing pools at the moment.
Yes.
But yeah, there's people from all over.
Oh, cool. That's cool. Perth, you're allowed outside. That's great, Rob. Okay, so now I've got a little bit of information in the blue box of the slides, as you can see, but I'm just going to talk through it. This is one of the first questions I got, and I get this a lot actually, that there are a number of sports nutrition products which might be kind of whole food, or they might be, your traditional kind of sports products like energy bars that have specific types of carbohydrate in them, which some people aren't able to tolerate either during training, or it might just be during racing. And in part, it's because, when we race or when we train, your gut will divert blood away from the stomach, even at quite a low intensity. Like it might only be 60 or 70% intensity with which that occurs. And particularly over time, as fatigue sets in, that perceived intensity ramps up as well. So digestion, and I probably don't need to tell any of you because we're all athletes here, it does get compromised. Particularly with some of those ingredients, and they might be like fructose, it might be that that's a date bar or nuts, and that might be too fibrous, or again fructose too high in those natural sugars. Or it might be maltodextrin as well, which is a really common kind of carbohydrate chain used in sports nutrition products, which doesn't always work with some people in terms of their ability to digest it easily. What I've found with my clients is there are products out there which I get them to kind of play around with and see whether they're a better alternative. And I'm sure that some of you out there will totally be familiar with these. And the first kind of, I suppose, commercial products which I generally go to is, first is Generation UCAN. Now, this is a product, it's also known as Superstarch, and it has been formulated as a cyclodextrin carbohydrate. And what that just means is that its chemical structure is digested slightly differently to other carbohydrate chains, and so it is released into the bloodstream from the gut far quicker, and it's been found to have less of a digestive issue for some people. Now, if you are allergic to corn, then and that's CORN, like corn husk, not QUORN, the vegetarian product, then it won't work for you, because it is a maize corn product, but it is generally quite palatable because it's not that sweet, and because it's released into the bloodstream quicker, it doesn't get kind of stuck in that kind of small intestine, kind of upper gut area to build up and to then cause GI problems or bloating or anything like that. Of course, it's all individual. So generally speaking, though, the majority of my clients who use that product fare really well on it. And it also has the added benefit that the way it's formulated means that it doesn't elicit a huge kind of insulin response, and so it doesn't really suppress fat burning. And that is another benefit, because of course, if you're an endurance athlete and you undergo training sessions which are 2+ hours, you need something to fuel that, and carbohydrate is a limited fuel source. So you kind of 70-kilo male, which is fairly light, really. So I don't know why he's still the reference male. I think he was the reference male back in 1970 and still is today, which is clearly, a little bit inappropriate. But they might have about 500 grams of carbohydrate stored, yet we'll have, and that equates to, 500 times 4, about 2,000 calories, whereas of energy that can be utilized as a fuel source. Whereas most endurance athletes have enough fuel stored in fat stores to go for like 10, 20, 30,000 calories worth. So anything you can do to support the ability to utilize that fuel source will be a good option. So that's one of the reasons why I really like Generation UCAN. And it comes in both a powder form and also a bar form. And the bars, actually, they've just reformulated them, and I've been playing around with them for this ultra marathon, which I'm doing, if it goes ahead, in early October. And they're very nutrient dense. No, sorry, they're very calorie dense. So they're really small. But they're easy to digest and they're soft, and it's no drama kind of getting them down, and they're really tasty too, actually, which I really appreciate. And now S Fuels is another one. So anyone who knows Dan Plews, Zach Bitter is another one who utilizes S Fuels. This is a type of fuel which doesn't necessarily utilize glucose. So their racing product does have glucose in it, but their training product doesn't. Instead, it has MCT powder, and it has branched chain amino acids, which are two fuel substrates that provide calories, but they don't provide the glucose. So they're not relying on those channels to be able to digest that carbohydrate, which is often where the GI issues are concerned. And so S Fuels is another like commercial product out there that I like, that comes in both a training and a racing fuel, and then also comes in bars, which can be really helpful when you need kind of solid food. But you don't have to go down that commercial fuel route anyway. And I think a lot of people kind of look to those real food options, but oftentimes they are, when they make them themselves, they're using dried apricots, which I've done, and terrible outcomes. I'm not going to go into detail on this slide, probably will later on. Dates is another one which people often go to, thinking it's a better choice. But from a gut distress perspective, it usually doesn't bode well. This is not everyone, but if you already have GI issues from energy bars, I don't think that those other kind of date and almond homemade real food options are very good for your gut. But potato mash, super simple. You might even buy like the little sachets of that, the stuff that you can take kind of backcountry. That's pretty easy on the gut and completely palatable because it's not sweet. So that can be a really good option. And you can just make that up in like one of those like soft flasks, actually. And I know that sounds a bit gross. You might put a bit of salt with it, or you might not. But you could use that to regularly trickle glucose into the bloodstream. Because one of the other reasons that people get GI distress is that they dump sugar in every half hour at amounts that is really difficult for your body to digest. And again, this isn't everyone. There are people who completely can tolerate the 25 grams of carbs from a gel every half hour, no problem. But if that isn't you, then looking at fueling more frequently is probably going to be a better option on your gut, because as I said, that gut distress comes because you're unable to digest and absorb it into your small intestine. And so that tends to start create this kind of block, and it just kind of builds up. Real simple though is actually just getting some glucose, dextrose. I think you have it in the supermarket. We have it here in the supermarket or in pharmacies. Put some water in, put some salt in, and you probably need more salt than what you would usually find in a typical sports drink as well. And just use that. If you're not needing food to help you feel satisfied, then that fuel option can be quite a good fuel option. And of course, there are plenty of other things out there, but these were some of the things that kind of came to mind. Sweet potato can be really good, but it does have a type of carbohydrate in it called polyols, which is part of the FODMAP family, which is why potato and sweet potato is a bit different, because potato doesn't. And for people who might already suffer from some GI issues, then sweet potato might not be like a good option. But, you know, if you don't have those kind of GI issues, then, you know, even baking some sweet potato or baking some potato, taking it along with you can be like a really good option as well. Esther, you've asked it how much salt. So Esther, we kind of think that in terms of the small intestine to be able to hydrate effectively, you do need like a sort of an amount of glucose, and you need an amount of sodium, and that is up to about I'm pretty sure it's about 1100. I'm going to say 1100 milligrams, and oftentimes in those sports nutrition products, I think the highest they might get to might be about 700 milligrams. There is a Gatorade product actually, like I've had before in the States, that's quite salty, which has, you know, 0 glucose, but it has the sodium in it. What I do recommend people do if they're kind of out on the bike and they're kind of caught short and they've got a corner store there, or we call it a dairy here, I don't know if you call it a dairy over there, you pop on in and grab something, and it might be that you're grabbing something with about 3 to 4% carbohydrate, so it's not like it's not like really high at 10 or 11%, and then you're getting one of those little sachets of salt that you can get, you know, by the chips and by the hot chips or by the pies or something, and add that to the drink, and it can, if you're feeling like you've hit the wall, it can make a massive difference, because a lot of that kind of hitting the wall is actually can be about electrolytes and not necessarily that you've run out of fuel. And studies have looked at that as well, that, you know, you look at cyclists who bonk, yet their glycogen or their muscle carbohydrate stores are not tapped out. So there's something else going on, and it appears to be either a central nervous system kind of response, which could be kind of drawn from either electrolytes or your branched chain amino acids. And yeah, that is about half a teaspoon of salt, Esther. V fuels. Now, Jackie, I don't know, I've heard of V fuels, and I can't recall what they're made of, I'm sorry, or how they're made up. But what I would say is that, you know, I'm going to be talking about fueling at some point, but I will just kind of say this now, is that if you find something, if you fuel for your event and it works really well for you, then there is no need to change that for that particular event. So if you've already got your strategy down pat for an Olympic or a 70.3 or an Ironman, and you know that it works, despite what we talk about here today, and some things that I say, then absolutely stick with it. But what I will say is that there is real value in there is real value in training your body to be able to tap into its own fat stores. And I know that there's a question about that, so I'll go into that in a bit more depth. But it can be really good to you don't want to pound your body with that type of race fuel every single weekend. So even if you find a product that works for you, it can be quite good to use less of it on certain kind of training sessions and things like that. But I'll get to that when I probably get to that slide. As per usual, it always happens that you always kind of go on to a different topic, because, you know, none of this is all like isolated, it's all kind of interlinked. Does that work? No, just kind of working this. There we go. So the second question, obviously, how shall I adapt a low carb, high fat diet for a female athlete? This is a great question, and I get this a lot, because you often hear that females are not resilient enough to perform, recover, and train optimally on an LCHF approach. And absolutely, I would say it's totally individual. And what we know at this point in time, if you look at the literature and you follow academics and people who lead in this field, like Kirsty Elliott-Sale, Craig Sale, I want to say Catherine Ackerman, I might be wrong about her name, but she works alongside Kirsty, and I want to say, they're somewhere in the UK, and I'm sorry, I do know, and it's just kind of escaped me now, but they've recently looked at the literature around women, around fueling, around changing the fueling and changing exercise and training strategies to support women in their menstrual cycle. And on the whole, we just don't have enough research to support a change in either the way that we train or the way that we fuel. And the most important thing really is to fuel for the work required. And from my practical experience, this is where people fall down. And it isn't just women, men do it too, but it's that, a large part of the kind of training for endurance is having a body composition that allows you to be light on the run and powerful on the bike. And for a lot of people, what they try and do is get as lean as possible and stay there for the entire year. And LCHF can be a good approach to help improve that body composition, because it allows your body to upregulate its ability to burn fat. You do get an improved kind of body composition from it, so you can lean up from it, because either intentionally or unintentionally you end up just eating less, because it's a much more satisfying way to eat rather than being fueled on carbs. But that unintentional under eating can also mean that you're under recovering, and it's being really careful around ensuring your calories are adequate and you're fueling for that work. But you're still able to kind of meet those body composition or those fat adaptation goals. And things in just like training changes across the course of a year. So you will train for a particular race and you'll have a base phase, then you'll go into some key kind of training blocks, and then you'll sharpen up right before the race, and then you'll recover from the race, and then you'll rinse and repeat. That's how I think nutrition should be trained, male or female actually. So it's really in that base phase time where if you want to work on being fat adapted and utilizing more fat as a fuel source, because one of your limiting factors is that your metabolic efficiency is pretty poor, then that is the time to do it. And it's but then it's spending that good kind of 6 to 12 weeks doing that. But then once you hit your key training sessions, you're fueling that work and you're adding back in the carbs, because it is required with the type of events that we do. Also, my first point there about low carb being a spectrum, that's super important as well, because people think that low carb is under 20 grams of net carbs, or you've got to be 50 carbs or below, or you're not allowed any carbs. But even if you look at kind of literature and what is viewed as low carb, it might be up to 40% of calories from carbs would still fall under that low carb umbrella. And I have athletes, and I myself kind of vary my low carb approach anywhere from maybe 80 grams of carbs to 220 grams of carbs, depending on the training for that day. What really matters with regards to being fat adapted is the timing of that nutrient intake, and not in allowing yourself the opportunity, to utilize fat as a fuel source whilst training, utilizing those carbs after training to be delivered to the muscle carbohydrate stores to help your recovery. And then that then allows you to recover appropriately to go and train again the next day. So that's, I think that's an important thing to remember. And athletes, and the other thing with low carb is athletes, if you tell them to do something, they want to take it to the nth degree. And we're just, wired that way. If one low carb, train low session a week is good, then 8 must be better. If staying under 100 grams of carbs most days of the week is good, then staying under 20 grams is better. And that's just not the case. And, if you look at an athlete's ability to burn fat, and preferentially over carbohydrate, they can still do that by taking on board 200 grams of carbs a day. And we can see that if you monitor their ability to produce ketones, which is the byproduct of fatty acid metabolism. So it isn't really about the amount of carbohydrates, it's more about the timing of the carbs and the type of carbohydrate as well. So, but a couple of things I think that are female specific is to monitor your symptoms around the menstrual cycle. So if you are someone who has premenstrual symptoms, and what I talk about in the kind of perimenopause slide in a few slides' time also is relevant to women who have PMS, is you really need to monitor how you feel around that stage, because there are some studies which suggest that we have less access to glycogen in that luteal or in that second phase of the menstrual cycle, as estrogen is higher and progesterone is higher. So whether or not that means that you need to take on board additional carbohydrate during your training, or you need to actually become fat adapted to handle that training more because you're unable to access glucose or glycogen, then those are some things to consider. Some of the researchers, and this isn't researched, so this isn't published kind of science, but people who work in the academic field around fat adaptation and ketogenic diets, they kind of think that maybe up to 40% of women might actually get thyroid, downregulation of the thyroid function. So that's something to really consider, because that's more than what men would get, and we're not sure of the mechanism kind of around that. And it might just be as simple as the fact that you tell a woman not to eat carbs. Well, that's super simple because she's took carbs out of her diet in the 80s, but tell her to eat high fat, that's different. And women we struggle to have more. It's really easy for a lot of women to restrict, and it's harder to eat more until, of course, they crash and burn, and then it's all on. So it is important to kind of monitor, use your biochemical monitors like your thyroid function, what's going on there, your menstrual cycle, like that is like a little kind of health passport, if you like, every month. And if you do like skip a cycle, or you have an ovulatory cycle, so it comes early because your progesterone has been lowered because you've gone low carb and low calorie, then that tells us that you're not doing it in an optimal kind of way. But it also, because it is individual, the other things to monitor are those other things I've got on the slide there. Monitor your energy levels, your ability to recover from your training. Are you under recovering? Don't you and the other thing is your mood. Are you irritable? Are you able to sleep or not? So these are the things that you want to kind of consider when you're going LCHF. And I'm just going to go to some of these questions. So speaking of timing of carb intake, is there any evidence that having coffee with or shortly after a meal will disrupt nutrient flow? Great question, Rob. I think it's Rob. Caffeine or coffee and tea both inhibit iron, and so that is the nutrient with which you'd want to be careful about. So if you are taking an iron supplement, and we actually get onto this in a minute, you do want to kind of wait 40 minutes in and around that coffee intake before you have it. And Alana, hi Mikala, Mikki's good. Doesn't women having less access to glycogen during the luteal phase indicate the need for exogenous carbohydrates rather than relying on fat adaptation? Great question, Alana. So what I said was that absolutely, less access to glycogen does mean you can rely on more you might need to rely on more exogenous carbohydrate. But of course, if you overdo that exogenous carbohydrate, you do run into those GI problems, because we have a limited storage capacity, first for carbs, which I suppose you can't access anyway in this instance, or no, you have less access. You can still access, it's just not as easy. But that GI issue it could be a real concern. And also, if you do have symptoms around your cycle, taking on board and dumping a lot of sugar in your system can just ramp up inflammation and ramp up those PMS symptoms. So that's not always the best approach. Whereas if you bypass the need to rely solely on that glycogen and you become more fat adapted, then it might not be such an issue. So that's something which we've not yet explored in the science literature, but certainly from a practitioner perspective, that is what I've just described is a sensible kind of avenue. And then, of course, that's just making sure that you consider that recovery and ensure that nutrients are adequate. So hopefully that answers that question. Yeah. Let me know if you've got other questions, though, obviously, about that. So for pre-race and training, I mean, this is probably 101 for a lot of you. So it is really individual as to what people can tolerate before a race and before training. And it also depends on the goal of the session. So if you are, much like the whole concept around becoming fat adapted, you don't want to take on board just carbohydrate and then go out and train in those initial stages of becoming fat adapted. And that is because your body is so used to utilizing glucose as a fuel source, it won't recognize that it's got other fuel that it can tap into. And so you get this spike in blood sugar, which subsequently increases the insulin response, and that can suppress fat burning. And then therefore that will make it more difficult for your ability to tap into your fat stores, which is the goal of that particular session or that particular block of training. So any carbohydrate in that instance you'd either not have carbs before you train, so you would either have fat or protein, or any carbohydrate that you do have, you would kind of couch it in either fat or carbs. And so some good examples of this might be that you have your oats with protein powder and some chia seeds or nut butter added. So that's that kind of fat and protein, that's that oats with protein and a little bit of fat. Or you might have banana and peanut butter before going out. Or you might have some scrambled eggs and some avocado before you go out. Or a protein shake, say a whey-based or a pea protein shake, which there's now been studies that have been published to show that, whey protein prior to training, it doesn't stop your ability to get some of that fat adaptation that can occur at that genetic basis, and you can upregulate the genes that are helpful in fat oxidation. So these are some really good options. Equally, it might be that you want to go out fasted, and I know a lot of athletes do that, and it's absolutely fine for them. So it is really individual. However, if you're going out and you've got some key intensity or interval based sessions, and that's that phase of your training, or you specifically want to work on that VO2 max because that's your limiting factor, that's when you'd want to utilize carbs. And you want to get that glucose to have as a fuel source at that really high intensity where that is what you will burn. You will burn glucose because you are unable to utilize fat at that really high intensity. And I'm thinking like kind of 80 or 90% of your VO2 max and above. So in that, it wouldn't be, any different from probably what you might already do. It could be that you'll have toast and jam, or it might be that you have, a piece of fruit. It might be that you have, again, that protein shake with some carbs added. So something like that could be good or could be really useful. And the key with regards to, fueling before training and before racing really is to smooth out those blood sugar fluctuations. So you're not, particularly on a race day, you're not eating like 4 hours before, like a big hit of carbs. And then by the time it gets to your race, you're dropping down low and you've had this almost rebound hypoglycemia or low blood sugar. So that's what you want to avoid. So on actual race day, some of those options I just described are ones which I would recommend, like the oats and protein powder. I know Dan had oats with some protein and some UCAN in his pre-Kona race day fuel. Eggs are great. You know, I know athletes actually go out pre-race on that. These are runners I know. One of them I know, Andreas Romanos, he's a really good ultra runner here in New Zealand. But also Zach Bitter has talked a lot about his strategy, and they have a similar strategy in that they go out on, say, scrambled eggs and avocado, and then they don't eat for an hour to help upregulate your ability to kind of get that fat burning process going. And interestingly, well, Zach Bitter, if you guys know of him, he is an LCHF athlete who definitely utilizes carbs during racing, but not as much as what other people would. But Andreas is not a fat adapted, is not an LCHF athlete. He's much more of a kind of probably moderate to higher carb, yet they both have that same initial strategy. And I think the important thing of not trying anything new on race day, but also practicing that race day nutrition in training, and actually practice, all of it, like the fuel that you're going to use during your race, during training as well. And I often get my athletes who I'm working with, we want to practice that like maybe once every 4 weeks or once every 3 weeks, depending on when race day actually is, or how soon it is, just so you're really familiar with how your body's going to respond to that fuel. Now, Barry, I've just seen your question, the benefit of fasted training. So there are a couple of benefits to fasted training, and one of them I already mentioned, which is that you get, there are particular endurance adaptations that only occur in the absence of glycogen. And so, and glycogen is, if you recall, your muscle's carbohydrate stores. And you get this shift in this expression of genes which upregulate your ability to utilize fat as a fuel source and upregulate that fat oxidation. And fasted training or training low is a good way to do that. And so that is one of the benefits of fasted training. Athletes who suffer from GI issues during training and racing can really benefit from fasted training as well, because sometimes it's a real cost benefit analysis. Are you going to, are you going to get up 3 hours earlier to make sure that you've digested that food, or do you actually need that 3 hours of sleep? So, you really want to kind of weigh that stuff up. And when it comes to race day, if you've fueled appropriately in the lead up to that event, your muscle carbohydrate stores will be topped out. And when you wake up on race morning, whilst your liver glycogen will be a little bit down, so that's another place with which we store glycogen, which is the first place that your body goes to convert into glucose and push it out into the bloodstream, then that might be a little bit low, but everything else, like you would have, your stores are kind of good to go. So for some people, it is actually just a matter of doing a few sprints to kind of get that conversion of glycogen to glucose just kind of going, as opposed to actually having any fuel. And then of course there are people who just like pizza before a race, in the morning, and sometimes it's that real psychological thing is the most important aspect of that meal is, what's worked, what meal did you have before you had your best race, and then there is that attachment to that meal, and regardless, that's what you want, and sometimes that's the most important aspect too. They're just really the things which kind of come to mind when I think about fueling for pre-racing and training. And then of course fueling for recovery. And I would say, this is one which can be really overlooked, particularly like times like COVID, like a lot of us don't know when our next race might be. So we can get a little bit complacent with regards to recovery nutrition. And then you end up under recovering, which may then end up being overtraining. So actually considering the type of training that you're doing and whether or not you need to fuel appropriately for recovery. I mean, you always do need to fuel appropriately, but I mean, in addition to your meals, is I think really key. So some of the considerations would be the goal of the athlete. So one of the train low strategies, which is kind of training fasted, training in a low glycogen state, which we know can accelerate those body recomposition or composition goals, is to delay feeding for 45 minutes to an hour after training, just so you don't, just to continue your body burning that fat. Now, because you delay training doesn't necessarily mean, because you've delayed feeding doesn't necessarily mean you will lose body fat, but because what is required in order to drop body fat is a calorie deficit, which should occur anyway because you do a lot of training, but it doesn't always. So that is something that can be used. You just don't want to overuse that whole delaying of feeding because you don't want to run the risk of that under recovery. If, however, on the flip side, you've got an athlete who struggles to maintain muscle mass and maintain their weight, then recovery fuel is essential, because that is the best time for them not only to kind of replenish nutrients, like the carbohydrate and protein, but it's real easy to just get in a shake that is calories without taking up too much stomach space and being over full. So that's some other considerations. Alongside that gut distress line, as I was talking about with going into training fasted, after training, your gut, because it's had the blood has been redistributed to other muscles, your after training, all of that kind of blood is then is diverted back to the gut, and it kind of flushes in, if you like, into that gut area, and it brings with it a lot of that metabolic breakdown of the exercise. So you've got a lot of reactive oxidative species and other kind of inflammatory cytokines. So if you're someone who suffers from gut distress and you've got all of these kind of inflammatory factors coming back to the gut because the blood is being rediverted back to the gut, actually eating then could contribute to leaky gut. So for someone with gut distress, you actually do want to wait a little bit of time before you take on board nutrition. And then when you do take on board nutrition, you want to be really careful about what you have. So you want to avoid some of those dietary inflammatory triggers. And for some people that could be dairy, wheat and gluten are others. Key kind of triggers, inflammatory triggers, or really high sugar load as well. So in that instance, for gut problems, you might want to delay taking on board anything other than water. And then when you do have something in that next meal, you want to ensure that you've got good amounts of protein and good amounts of carbohydrate. And what I will say is, when we look at the research around this kind of recovery area, if you are training within 8 hours, then timing is critical in terms of nutrient replenishment. But if you are only doing one a day training, it isn't as important. And in fact, just getting your total protein load across the course of a day, and adequate carbohydrate to support your goals, and good amounts of dietary fat with an abundance of vegetables, those would be key considerations. And it might be that you can do that within 3 meals and a snack, and you might not need additional kind of recovery fuel. I already talked about the goals for adaptation versus recovery. The last thing on fueling for recovery is if you are specifically having something to help accelerate it, because you've got training again within 8 hours or so, keep it low fat, because we don't digest fat very well. And so you do want that protein and carbs, and it might be a protein powder with either water or milk if you have no gut issues and you can tolerate dairy, or it might be almond milk, which is sort of just like flavored water, really, isn't it? And some fruit and something like that. That would be like a good option. And I often say to my clients, hey, put your protein powder in a bottle to add water at the end of your training session, have a banana afterwards. Just keeping it real simple. Now, Ebony, I'm just seeing your question. For those athletes who are looking to lose body fat, how much of a deficit in calories is too much? And how long would you recommend as an okay length of time to be in that deficit? Those are really great questions, Ebony. So the first thing I would say is be mindful of when you are when you are wanting to lean up, and you don't want to lean up to race weight, like, you know, to be in peak condition 6 or 8 weeks out from your race, because that you'll be too lean for those real key intensity sessions. But I'm sure that you know that anyway. So with regards to kind of best practice, you really want quite a modest drop in weight. And so if you're looking at a calorie deficit, you want a deficit that will elicit a weight change of maybe about 0.5%. I'm pretty sure that's what it is, 0.2 to 0.5% of your body weight. And so if we're thinking about that across the course of a month. So let me just do the math to make sure that's right. So if you've got an athlete who's 80 kilos, 10% of 80 is 8. So 5%, and so that 5% of 80 is, what's that, 4? Yeah, that is right. So it is about a 0.5% weight change per week. So you can see that for that 80 kilo athlete, it's actually not a lot. It's like 400 grams a week, which of course, the course of a month, we're looking at about 2 kilos a month or something like that. Now that is really conservative, but what we know is that a more conservative approach allows us to help protect that muscle and help protect bone, because these are the things which athletes are at risk of losing if you go too hard too fast. And that's a reality. And that's when you also get into that kind of red zone. So, you know, if you're wanting to kind of lean up, I would look at it as a project over 6 to 8 months. Actually, and then you want to still have that buffer of about, say, 2 to 3 kilos, depending on how that is relative to your actual body weight, to then make sure that when you hit those key intensity sessions, you've got the energy on board that helps protect you in those sessions, and you'll probably then the training itself will take care of the last little piece of the puzzle with regards to your body composition. So in terms of the amount of calories, you actually don't, you need to then adjust the number of calories to elicit a body weight loss of about that 0.5%. 0.5 to 1%, but I'd much more conservative. And then it is really important as well to consider that, you know, people might have a metabolic set point. And if they do, it means that they can they can kind of follow an approach that gives that deficit for about, 12, 16 weeks. But then suddenly things don't shift and they end up plateauing. And it might be a real plateau, or it might be that they're just fed up with what's going on because they're not losing weight the way that they think they are. And then they're starting to kind of reintroduce things which are going against their goal. But it could well be a plateau, and what it appears is that we may need to spend a little bit of time at that maintenance weight, at maintaining that body weight, so you boost the calories to maintenance calories, until your body readjusts. Because if we do have some kind of metabolic set point, then the body will defend that set point. And if it's used to being at 80 kilos, it might not like 76 kilos, and it might not want to go down to 75, and it might really try hard to push back up to 80 if you're continuing to push that deficit. So again, this is individual as well, but what could be helpful is to kind of go through. You might actually make this, depending on how much body fat you might want to lose, you might make this like a year to an 18-month project where you have kind of 12 weeks of kind of calorie deficit, at that conservative rate, but then you hold and maintain those calories, and that might be throughout those intensity kind of sessions. And then you might race, and then you're back into a recovery phase, maybe at 5 months, and then that's when you are at that new kind of maintenance weight to then push into a calorie deficit again. And, you know, and I say this, and where I get this kind of info from is actually more from kind of physique nutrition. And that's where a lot of our kind of information comes in terms of kind of, if you like, best practice, you know. So there's a lot of ways to do it, but in my experience, going too hard, too fast, just you'll end up in a metabolic kind of hole that is very difficult to overcome. Yeah. I see that it's 10 to 9. So I'm glad that we've got another session scheduled, actually, because I'm like onto slide 4. And Rob, are you there?
Yep.
Cool. So I might just do this one. Does that sound all right? This last question?
Yep, absolutely.
Cool, that's good. And also I'll say you guys are asking some great questions, so that's awesome. This last question is a really good one as well. So how do you ensure you get enough protein plus already tick all those other nutrient boxes when training ramps up? It's such a critical one because as a vegetarian and particularly a vegan athlete, you don't have access to the same bioavailable protein or protein quality that an omnivore athlete will have. And I say that because the research is quite clear. It's fact. This is not opinion, but when you look at the amino acid bioavailability, you can see that the amino acids in things like beef and eggs and whey, is much better than it is for soy and pea and rice proteins. So we kind of, as endurance athletes, depending on your goal, you want to be looking at about 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of lean body mass protein per day. And that's really different from and a lot of people hear that and they might calculate it and go, oh, so I need 120 grams of protein. That's 120 grams of eggs or of meat or something like that. But it's actually not. 100 grams of animal protein, for example, has 22 grams of actual protein. And eggs, so one egg has about 7 grams of protein. So it can be really difficult to kind of get the protein that you need. Now, for a vegetarian athlete, for a vegan athlete, even more so, because it's been suggested that reduced bioavailability ups the amount of protein required by up to like 30% of an increase. And a lot of the foods that vegan and vegetarian athletes rely on for protein are actually don't have a lot of protein in them. They are just that compared to other food sources in the diet, they add a substantial proportion more protein. But if you look at it kind of in the big spectrum of foods that deliver protein, they're actually pretty low. Legumes and kidney beans and chickpeas and lentils are really good examples of this, where you need to eat about kind of 6 cups of quinoa to get the same amount of bioavailable protein that you'll find in 100 grams of fish, for example. And with those 6 cups of quinoa comes like an additional caloric load. That's quite a lot of calories, notwithstanding how difficult it would be to actually eat that. But of course there are ways around that. And to my mind, being like I am someone who does advocate the inclusion of animal protein to be really healthy, but I know absolutely people can be super healthy as a vegetarian, a vegan, of course, and it's just being really mindful of getting in that protein. But I would say that this is an issue across the board, regardless of whether you're vegetarian or whether you do incorporate animal protein in your diet, because protein is the one area where a lot of athletes fall down. So I utilize protein powder a lot with my athletes, and you can get some really good protein powders which have a blend of rice and pea protein, which together have all of the essential amino acids. So essential in nutrition means that your body can't produce them themselves, and they need to be and they're required for us to eat through the diet. So that's what makes something essential. And animal protein is complete protein. Also though, quinoa and soy are two vegetarian foods which have those complete amino acids, but again their bioavailability is less, so you just need to eat more of those foods. So with the protein powder, I'm pretty sure you guys have well, yes, you have Aussie Bodies, of course, but also Balanced Sports Nutrition. They have a really good plant protein powder, which is a pea and rice blend, providing those kind of key essential amino acids. Of course, you know, if you are a vegetarian and you're not vegan, then a really good whey protein isolate will also hit that. Because as I said earlier, whey is one of the highest bioavailable kind of proteins. Within each meal, you really want to have, so the important amino acid, which is the breakdown product of a protein, the most important one is leucine. And leucine is the one that will stimulate muscle protein synthesis and aid in that recovery and repair of tissue. And you do need, I'm going to say about 3 grams of leucine in each meal, 3 to 5, but I don't have my notes in front of me, so do double check that. But what I do know is that in terms of protein, you need at least 30 grams of protein to provide that leucine. And so protein powder is a really great way to do that, particularly in those earlier kind of breakfast meals or snacks where protein isn't convenient. It's you know, carbs are just so convenient compared to protein. And unless you like eggs and you like 4 or 5 of them, you're not getting what you need. So adding protein powder to oats. I've got a heap of recipes on my website actually, which has like protein, and on Instagram I follow, I often post what I eat. Well, I always post what I eat actually. And of late I've been kind of posting up my breakfasts and showing the amount of protein that's in them. Because as you know, I'm a masters athlete as well, and as we age, we actually need more protein. So, which we'll talk about next time with kind of menopause, but that 30 grams becomes 40 grams of protein. Eggs and cheese are great sources of protein for a vegetarian athlete as well. And tofu and tempeh are 2 really good sources of protein. Just try to go organic, which we have readily available in New Zealand, so I don't doubt you also have available. And then, you know, quality dairy products as well. And for people who tolerate dairy, having said that though, there isn't as much protein in yogurt as you think there is. Like there might be kind of, I think it's like 5 grams per 100 grams. It's not a lot anyway. So that amount of protein again is 1.6 grams per kilogram of lean muscle mass to 2.2 grams. And it depends on your goals. But when I talk to my athletes, I don't expect them to work that kind of amount of protein out. I just work with them in helping them design meals. So they're not thinking about, oh, how many grams of protein am I having? They're thinking about, I've got to have 4 eggs, because people generally think in terms of food rather than in terms of nutrients. Of course, if you do think in terms of nutrients, awesome. And then finally, the one from a micronutrient perspective, the ones that I've got here are the ones that you're not going to find in vegetarian-based foods, and that's and what I don't have there is collagen, and I should have put that in, which has glycine and proline, which are amino acids which are important for our musculoskeletal tissue, for our gut. Glycine helps us sleep. That's why there's a big buzz around collagen peptides right now, but particularly for athletes, super important. You've got creatine, which is you can take as a supplement, but it is in animal products. And I will say, actually, creatine is one of the best things for all athletes and actually all people. There's so much research now to support its use as an antioxidant for helping with cognitive function as we age. So if you're not on creatine, I'd say get on creatine. And creatine monohydrate, the real, the cheap one, no problem. Choline is super important for the brain and the production and breakdown of neurotransmitters in the brain, and it's only found in liver and eggs. Small amounts in butter maybe, but certainly liver and eggs are 2 of the primary places you'll find that. Fish oils, super important for the brain, for recovery. And in fact, there has been research to support it from a muscle recovery perspective. Post-exercise, the addition of fish oils has been really helpful. and also with that improvement in body composition too. So I find that really interesting. And carnitine is another one. And we call these zoo nutrients because they're not in plant sources. And the last one is, of course, if you are vegan, iron, zinc, and well, iron if you're vegetarian, zinc if you're a vegetarian as well. And vegan, you need iron, zinc, and B12 because B12 isn't in any plant products. So you'll need to supplement with those ones. So yeah, hopefully that, and I know that I've only gone through a few of those questions, but hopefully that's gone through it in kind of enough detail so you guys, with those particular questions, that's 6 of 18, I think. So I've kind of explained it so you appreciate why I'm saying what I'm saying. And you guys asked some great questions, which of course I always really appreciate. But are there any final questions for this evening? You're welcome, Rob. Thank you.